Welcome to Biochemistry Unfolded, From Atoms to Algorithms, an online podcast on the topic of biochemistry and biophysics. Hey, welcome back to this is the 10th episode here of my biochemistry podcast, Biochemistry Unfolded, From Atoms to Algorithms. And so today I'm thinking of some very important, one very important thing in computational chemistry and biophysics, and that's the role that computer programming plays in the field. And computer programming often plays a very foundational role in biochemistry, biophysics, as well as bioinformatics. And what is valuable here is it enables researchers to handle and analyze, model, and even simulate biological systems with a large amount of precision and, of course, a large amount of scalability as well. And this scalability is also important for scaling up to simulate on many processing cores on like supercomputers, for example. We're not just using one processor core, we're using an entire cluster of supercomputing. And of course, because of that, your programming skills become critical in this field. And it's also one of the often neglected areas of chemistry education. I think many chemistry and even biology students they think computer programming, oh, that's computer science. I don't want to do computer science. I want to do biology. I want to do chemistry. Well, let's merge the two together. And one of the strengths of education is to be interdisciplinary, right? And so not just to focus on one particular area, but to focus on, to have some skills a little bit more broad-based beyond just biology and chemistry. So that's where computer programming, you don't have to be a computer science major to understand some basic coding. Obviously, if you go into major in computer science, you're going to do a lot of code, and you're going to do a lot of interesting things, calculating fractals and calculating, a lot of database work that may be completely irrelevant to biology. But when we think about it, we're already doing a lot of computer programming, right? We're already doing a lot of programming. Let's take out the computer first and think that in chemistry, let's think about what an algorithm is, right? Now, what is an algorithm? An algorithm is simply a set of instructions to accomplish a specific task, right? And you're either making something or you're going to accomplish, to finalize some sort of a product in the end, right? And so if you're in the chemistry lab and you're synthesizing a small molecule, or if you're synthesizing something in the lab, you're doing that organic synthesis. You're going through a procedure to make something, and it's probably a multi-step synthesis, maybe 7 or 8 steps long. Each step, well, you're applying a specific procedure. You're applying an algorithm to do that, right? And these days, a lot of experimental lab work is automated through robots and different machines. And so maybe you're not doing actual coding on a text-based level, but you're actually running through an algorithm. You're pushing buttons on a machine to automate that process, right? So that's very important. Let's go to Mother Nature's thinking about synthesis, right? Well, you've got a multi-step synthesis, and Mother Nature has been doing algorithms for millions of years, right? Let's look at glycolysis, for example. Producing pyruvate from glucose, that's a 10-step synthetic mechanism that literally takes place in every cell, not just human cells, but animal, plant cells, every cell pretty much undergoes glycolysis. And so you've got a 10-step synthesis, you have a small algorithm, right? And you're going through each of those 10 steps, ultimately producing, well, you're producing intermediate processes along the way. Maybe you use some energy here, you cleave this here, you produce some NADH here, and then ultimately you arrive at your final product, your final pyruvate. And now, how does Mother Nature does this? Well, Mother Nature controls this via its own code, right? It controls it by the genetic code. That's your own DNA. And so your DNA is not unlike a computer program. Your DNA is a set of instructions that tells the cell how to produce each individual enzyme, in this case glycolysis. You probably have, you've got 10 or 12 proteins involved in glycolysis that are different enzymes, and each one of those enzymes has 10 or 12, it has the same number of genes that encode that protein, right? That's called the central dogma of molecular biology, where we go from DNA going to mRNA and translating proteins after that, right? That's an algorithm in itself. Now, if you're a molecular biologist, you're learning how to modify those biological algorithms. You can actually use CRISPR technology to actually reprogram DNA in much the same way that you're actually reprogramming computer code, right? It's a little more complicated, it's a little bit differently, but if you think about it the same way, you're essentially doing the same thing that a programmer did. You're just doing it with a different tools, right? Think about other algorithms, right? YouTube, for example, YouTube has an algorithm, right? That algorithm is a set of code that takes as input information about what people want to watch, what you want to watch, and you arrived on this video right here, probably by being suggested by the YouTube algorithm that you might be interested in biochemistry, bioinformatics, or something very similar to that, right? And so that's an algorithm that takes your user data and suggests videos that you want to watch. If you watch a lot of cat videos, you're going to get recommended a lot of cat videos, right? Same thing, it's just a different application of the algorithm. So in order to make that algorithm work, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this video. There's my little shameless plug for my own little thing. That actually does help, because then I can see more. I can see how people are interacting with these videos, and that helps me to produce better content and maybe come up with different things that you might be interested in, right? So, all right, so we've kind of gone through an algorithm. Now, what algorithms, what areas where programming might be actually particularly useful in computational chemistry, biochemistry, biophysics? Where would we have that apply? There's a lot of areas. I mean, first, my particular specialty is structural biology and molecular modeling. And here, of course, we've talked a lot about AlphaFold and Rosetta Fold. I think Rosetta and AlphaFold just won the Nobel Prize in chemistry last year. And David Baker's group is the Rosetta. That's their big thing. And so we're doing protein structure prediction. We're predicting the 3D structure based on the single sequence. And so that's a big thing. Also, of course, when we get that 3D structure, we can't forget that proteins are living and breathing, and so they move. They fluctuate, so we have to do molecular dynamic simulations. So we use programs such as GROMACS, NAMD, and other molecular dynamics simulation software to simulate what that biological macromolecule would do in solution or inside the cell. Other software used would be like homology modeling, which is very similar to AlphaFold. You're again predicting protein structure. There's some, Modeler is probably one of the older homology modeling software today. It's built into the molecular operating environment by Chemical Computing Group. That's MO. And and even Mo can be automated. There's an SVL scripting language within Mo that enables you to automate various tasks within that molecular operating environment. And again, AutoDock, and if you're doing docking with AutoDock or ClusPro, that's also a big thing. And then when you get to visualization, tools such as PyMol and VMD utilize a lot of scripting languages to automate how you visualize those molecules. And PyMol, I really use VMD a little bit more, but PyMol is also very heavily used and very heavily now. PyMol, the way it got its name, the PY is basically Python, right? Now, Python is a scripted programming language. It's not compiled, and so it's very easy to automate a lot of different tasks with that Python script. So that's where we kind of got PyMol from there. VMD uses another scripted language called TCL, and so that is also very useful as well too. So again, even if you're not using a specific programming language, you might actually just use like a shell script, like a bash shell script, to automate tasks within Unix. And this is also one of the main reasons why a lot of scientific researchers will use Unix or Linux operating systems, including the Mac OS X, which, Mac OS is a full version of Unix. And so that just enables more rapid and easier scripting for many of these common tasks that you run automated. So that's kind of nice. One other area as well that programming is very useful for is genomics and transcriptomics, right? And so this is analyzing that huge high volume data of the DNA and your genomics data, right? And so what you're doing here is, if you look at the human genome, the human genome itself, there's like 22,000 genes, and there's billions of base pairs in DNA. And so all those billions of base pairs put together into one genetic code, and we basically order these using just a single letter code, like adenine is A, guanine is C, cytosine is guanine is G, cytosine is C, and thymidine is T, and then it was uracil, and RNA is U. So A, G, C, T, and U. Then we look at that code, and of course, then we can utilize pattern matching software to actually kind of look for different genes and look for different things. So computer programming helps us analyze a lot of that data through these files. And so you can not only look at the DNA, but look at the RNA sequence. You can look at different variants and different genomes. And there's a couple of different pieces of software like STAR and GATK and Bowtie that undergo genome assembly pipelines and that sort of thing. So because we have a lot of data, Python scripting especially, or even Perl, and for statistical analysis, we may use R to utilize that code as well. So that's going to be a big thing. And so even if you're a biology student, you might get into some of this genomic data. A basic knowledge of computer programming would actually enhance your ability to do biology type research there. Also, of course, another big area that, of course, I've talked about on this channel quite extensively recently, and it's kind of revolutionizing everything, is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so artificial intelligence moving forward, without a doubt, is going to play a major role in the field of structural biology, genomics, and biophysics. Um, some of the things we can do with artificial intelligence, obviously AlphaFold is a machine learning algorithm that predicts protein structure and function. But one of the biggest things that we're still struggling with there is post-translational modifications. So when a protein is translated, it's often not in its functional form. And so there's often modifications that need to be done after translation. That's why we call them post-translational modifications. And so we're going to need to develop and utilize AI and machine learning to help us look at the many myriad ways in which proteins are activated after they're translated. And AlphaFold so far has been kind of not really able to solve this problem yet. So that's one of the big things there. Another thing that AI is going to come into play is classifying gene expression patterns and disease states, and it's going to come into play in drug discovery with different QSAR models and predicting binding affinity and etc. Also, AI is playing a huge role in and especially some of your natural language AI is just playing a major role in understanding and interpreting the scientific literature as well. ChatGPT and there's another program called SciSpace. These are programs where you can actually upload a PDF of a scientific paper, and it will actually help interpret the paper. You can ask it questions like, what are the what's the major conclusions of this paper, and can you elaborate on this particular method? You know, if they're studying like PCR, for example, you could then use ChatGPT to explain PCR at a first year graduate student level, or explain PCR to a high schooler, right? And you know, that's actually one of the areas, one of the major strengths of AI. I actually use that a lot, especially in dealing with some of my first year students here at Tennessee Tech. I'm, you know, often I speak at a very high level, and I'm trying to kind of dumb things down. I don't want to say dumb things down, but you want to speak to a first year student instead of a graduate student. So I'll often ask ChatGPT to explain the concept of pH to a first year freshman student in college, or explain the concept of chemistry equilibrium to a first year student. And so that often helps me kind of pick the right words to explain to someone that's not quite as experienced, right? So natural language processing, that's going to be a huge thing, and if you can master the use of some of the Chat GPT functions or SciSpace or some of these other programs, AI programs out there, then that's going to be a huge benefit to you. So that's also big. Now, in computational biophysics and theoretical chemistry, here we're getting a little bit more into quantum chemistry simulations. And so we're solving Schrödinger's equation. And so we're using software such as Gaussian or Orca. Many of, Gaussian and Orca, these are high-level computer programming software. They're very good at what they do. It's kind of Gaussian. It's kind of the gold standard for quantum chemistry. But it's not exactly user-friendly. It's not a graphical user interface. It's not a GUI. It uses input scripts to input its data. And now you could generate that input script yourself, obviously. But if you're the best way to generate these inputs is to kind of script them using your own programming language. Then you can kind of automate that, and you can, get it to generate, different scripts for multiple molecules, for example. And so if you know a little bit of Python or Perl, that's going to be very, very helpful and very useful in your calculations. We can have custom scripting for everything from energy minimization to conformational sampling, thermodynamic analysis, where you're getting free energy, enthalpy, and entropy out of that. And you don't also have to write your own code. You can also modify your own code or download code from GitHub or other areas online. A lot of researchers will post different code in different areas online, and then you could modify that code to do things that you need it to do. If you're calculating things like electrostatics or solvent effects, or if you're looking at different transition state information, you can modify your own code to do that. So a little bit of coding knowledge will go a long way in that regard. And so we also use a lot of code for analyzing metabolic pathways. And that gets into what's called systems biology, where we're not just looking at one aspect, we're looking at an entire system. And so if we're simulating metabolic networks, there's tools such as the Cobra toolbox in MATLAB, Python libraries. There's a lot of Python libraries that are out there. There's actually both Python and Perl have their own versions called BioPython and BioPerl that you can add on, and that adds a lot of functions for handling genomics and proteomics data and metabolomics data. You've probably heard of the omics, right? And so when you're looking at the omics, that's where you're looking at, the entire set of, one particular aspect of biology. So genomics, you're looking at everything involved in gene transcription and control. Proteomics, you're looking at everything involved in protein translation. Metabolomics, you're looking at specific metabolites, right? And so this generates an enormous amount of data. And so when you have that much data, it's going to come in, a little bit of computer programming is going to enable you to go through all of that data in a major kind of way, right? And so, this enables us to do kinetics modeling of these enzymatic reactions and looking at the, metabolic flux. So if you're looking at flux balance analysis, for example, this is going to come into play as well. And so then again, if you're doing data analysis and visualization, again, there's a lot of scripting. There's a lot of program now. A lot of the programs with data analysis and visualization are going to be graphical user interfaces. Like VMD is a very good software. Chimera X by the University of California at San Francisco is probably an even easier interface, and both of those are free to academic users. There's also like PyMol, I think we talked about that. And most of these also have scripting options that can automate things like run batch analysis of different proteins and different data. And so you can also run scripts, like if you're doing spectroscopy or chromatography, you can also run a script to automate the data collection and the visualization of that spectroscopy and chromatography data. So if you have a little bit of programming knowledge there, that's going to come in very handy. There's also a lot of interactive visualizations, such as Plotly, and there's different apps you can get for the statistical package R, and so that's useful. And there's a lot of apps for statistical analysis with doing like ANOVA and PCA and different clustering apps as well too. So a lot of these things are going to be very useful if you're designing and maintaining biological databases. Some of the databases we have are the UniProt database with protein sequence information, and that goes hand in hand with the protein data bank, the RCSB protein PDB. And so, these are two of the predominant databases. There's also a lot of other databases out there with like the NCBI database, and there's PubChem, which is a database of small molecules structures. And so there's a lot of data within these databases that then you can use scripting to extract information and to look at various information that is in these databases to help you get what you're looking for out of that, right? And even if you're an experimental chemist, so you're like, I'm not a computational chemist. I work in a lab. I'm an experimental chemist. Um, well, there's an increasingly large number of instrumentation in many of these labs, and many of these use computers. There's a lot of spectrophotometers and robotic pipetters, like the UV vis instrument we have now. That actually runs on the Android operating system, actually. And it actually connects to the internet. So we have a UV vis that connects to the internet. It's actually pretty cool. And there's even options to automate various tasks, right? And so a lot of experimental chemistry, you're going to be collecting data experimentally. And in order to collect a massive amount of data, you need to automate those tasks. And so if you could learn how to program those instrumentation to automate your tasks, that's going to be fairly useful. Now, you're a chemist. You want to know what programming language you want to study, right? Now, the good news, you don't have to dive too deep into programming. I actually recommend every student, every STEM student, should probably take at least one college level programming class, right? I think I've actually taken several, right? I started taking basic programming back in, I think, middle school. That was when we were playing the Oregon Trail, and that was kind of cool. Of course, I died of dysentery several times, but that's a different story. But I learned how to program in BASIC on an Apple IIe, and then by my senior year of high school, we got Macintoshes, and I learned Pascal programming. And then my sophomore year of college, I learned Fortran. And believe it or not, Fortran, I don't really use much Pascal anymore, but Fortran there's still a lot of legacy code out there that runs on Fortran. And a little bit of Fortran knowledge is actually still very useful. So it's not going to go away completely. I think most people now, I think when I was in grad school, I took another class in Java and C programming, and most of your programming has kind of migrated to Java and C, especially for high performance computing and molecular simulations and that sort of thing. Although there is still a lot of Fortran code, and it's still fairly common. So if you take a good basic course in Java or C program, I guess C would probably the predominant. Java is C based, and even Python and Perl are C based. That would be a good starting point. What that programming course is going to teach you is the basic concepts of programming, and what a for loop is, and what a while loop is, and what an if-then statement does. They're going to teach you some of the basic concepts. And then when you learn a new language, if you know those basic programming constructs, learning a new language is just a matter of learning new syntax, right? And you're like, oh, I don't have to put a semicolon at the end of each line now, or, there's just different ways of writing things. And so I recommend starting with just a good basic course in programming at maybe the first or second year level. Many computer science courses are going to offer that. And then just kind of go from there, right? I actually taught myself Perl and Python just by reading books. I think Python, I've got a good book about Python for dummies. And Perl, a very similar textbook as well. I think the For Dummies book those books are actually very good. So if you want to learn some good basic programming, that they're actually pretty well written. And So also, of course, other things R and MATLAB. Again, those are a little bit more specialized. R is very good for statistical analysis and genomics. And MATLAB, of course, is better for maybe systems biology and modeling. I'm not sure if I'm sure it's used in many courses. I know also in MATLAB, the engineering schools use MATLAB a lot very heavily, so they're going to integrate that into their curriculum. I haven't really seen an actual course in MATLAB, but it's generally integrated into other existing curriculum. So that's where you kind of pick up some of that. And even in some of my courses that I teach in biochemistry, I integrate some basic knowledge of Perl and Python scripting into those courses, even though that's not the major topic of the course. I just introduce some of the basic knowledge of code and how it can be used to solve problems without going into too much detail of how to actually write the code. I just present different code that students can use and execute, and it solves the problem, right? So that's very useful. So again, you don't have to minor in computer science. You don't have to have too much training. Just a good basic programming class is going to go a long way for you. And beyond that, books and online learning. If you go, I think it's just python.org, or you can search for Perl via Google, and you can find a lot of information on there as well. So that's kind of where we can get it. And so when we're kind of thinking about programming skills, it is interesting that, especially in chemistry and biology, programming skills are often neglected in like a chemistry curriculum. And so why is that? That is a good question, because it's an increasingly useful skill, and it's going to help you, especially on the job market. It's going to give you a leg up over many other candidates, right? Now, if we look at chemistry programs, and probably even biology to a certain extent as well, my undergrad degree is in biology, I'm now in chemistry, so, but many of these programs historically have been designed more around experimental techniques and analytical methods, as well as theoretical foundations, so quantum mechanics, thermodynamics, and chemistry, for example. And so because they've got limited amount of time to put together a curriculum, a 4-year curriculum for a typical BS degree in chemistry or biology, programming is just one of those things that's kind of viewed as, it's an elective, it's peripheral. It's not core to the central chemistry practice, but there's a lot of fields in chemistry, such as computational chemistry and cheminformatics, and in biology, bioinformatics. And these are huge fields. There's jobs here. There's a lot of things going on here, but it's not one of the core areas of chemistry. And so when we're designing a curriculum, we want to teach, like for chemistry, you need to take general chemistry, organic, physical chemistry, and biochemistry, analytical chemistry. Those are your core topics right there. Computational skills and programming is often seen as, that would be a good elective to have. And that gives you, the student, an opportunity to say, hey, I do want to get some of this programming. I'm going to take a programming elective, and I'm going to get that experience. So that gives you the opportunity to do that. And I think more of our academic advisors should probably focus on this area and get students more programming experience. There's often, with chemistry students, there's often a lack of early exposure to programming. Most students starting out college, they say, hey, I want to be a chemistry major. And so when they do that, they're looking at what their background is. They probably never took any programming course or maybe very limited in high school or middle school or before. And so they're like, okay, I want to do chemistry. I want to do experimental stuff. I want to synthesize something. I want to make something blow up. I want to do some cool chemistry, right? But a lot of people don't think, oh, this programming stuff is also pretty cool itself. And hey, guess what? That's where the future is right there, too. So this is part of our future. Courses like physical chemistry laboratory or instrumental analysis, these involve a lot of data processing, but they don't often have enough of coding. Usually you're collecting data, and you're collecting data from an automated system, and much of the curriculum doesn't really focus too much on the coding. They're going to say, okay, press this button, get this data, and get that data out there. They're not going to teach you too much about how to code to manipulate that data, and get different things out of it. Now in biology, there is a lot more because they're using more bioinformatics and statistics and R, and genomics has gotten so big. So there is more coursework in that bioinformatics area. It's giving students a little bit more of a head start in terms of programming. But again, even a lot of biology departments are often kind of lacking in this area as well. There's often a big cultural divide between disciplines. So, again, many chemistry students, they see programming as, oh, that's computer science, that's engineering, I don't need to do any coding, right? And you often, the biggest quote that I keep hearing from chemistry students is, I'm a chemist, I'm not a coder. And and many instructors teaching chemistry are just not as computationally inclined. So they may not integrate programming into their teaching. And I think they're doing a disservice by not having at least some exposure to programming. I think especially in the age of AI, we need to be stepping up the game and including more programming experience there. There's also, by chemistry students, there's also kind of a perceived learning curve. It's saying, I decided to go into chemistry because I wasn't all that good at math, and I didn't want to go into computer science. That's just too much. It's too hard. Programming's too hard. And it's not worth my time, right? And they also just don't see an immediate connection to their research. They don't see what it's going to do to them. I was recently watching the show 1923, which is very interesting about people living in at the Yellowstone Ranch up in Montana, and there was a salesman selling electricity, and he was talking about, hey, here's this washing machine. It's an electric washer, and oh, here's an electric refrigerator, and the people are like, so you're selling electricity, and then you're going to rent to me this washing machine and this refrigerator? What's that going to do for me? This is 100 years ago, right? And I'm kind of thinking the same people today are thinking, what's AI going to do for me now, right? Can you imagine that? Think about how far we've come in 100 years, yet we're still looking at the same problems, right? So that's kind of interesting. And so we need to kind of get past some of this learning curve, and we need to be able to provide more of a contextual application to what programming is going to be able to do for students, and kind of integrate that into solving actual chemistry problems. Because like a lot of programming courses you're going to take, you might learn Python, and in class you're going to calculate factorials, maybe draw random shapes and stuff. But to a biochemistry student, they're like, who cares, right? That's just a factorial. That's just some random object. If we can integrate what the program can do to solve chemistry problems, then the chemistry students will say, oh, a light bulb will go off in their head, right? So I think that's going to be a a big factor in overcoming some of that context. And other things, many of these students might think that they have a fear of math because they think computer science, you're going to have to go into a lot of math. Now, chemistry, you're already doing a lot of math. And when you get a chemistry degree, you really need at least calculus 1, probably calculus 2. But many chemistry students are saying, well, I've taken my calculus, I'm done with that. I won't go into anything else. They don't want to go into the linear algebra they might need to do, or different statistical mechanics concepts, or mathematical modeling. And so they kind of say, okay, calculus, yeah, okay, let's take it because it's required, I'm done, right? Because they probably weren't all that good at math in the first place. And just said, okay, I've done my math, I've done my calculus, now let's get on to chemistry. That's kind of one of the things there. And so another area where there's kind of a disconnect in programming and chemistry might have to do with just the career perceptions that students have of what chemists are going to do in industry or biotech or pharma. And these are rapidly changing fields on a daily basis. It's important to stay on top of whatever field. Now, many people think that your typical chemist or biochemist is going to be running reactions on a daily basis. You're going to be using pipettes and pipetters and collecting data. Collecting data, guess what? All that data needs to be put somewhere and analyzed, and probably analyzed, all that massive amount of omics data, from genomics or proteomics, for example. Well, that needs some sort of a computer to process. And so, believe it or not, a lot of this processing data and automating applications, it uses a lot of programming skills right there. And so a little bit of coding fluency, this gives you a leg up in your job search by saying, oh, you know how to code. That's not maybe the major part of this job, but that could be very useful. And so that might get you the job over someone that doesn't have any coding experience, right? So that could be very useful unto itself. So in the end, what's the solution? So what we need to do is introduce programming fairly early in the context of education. This should involve using biochemically or chemistry-related tasks for those programming. So modeling enzyme kinetics or producing sequence data, automating visualization of proteins, for example. If we can keep that relevant instead of doing things that are just not chemistry related just to teach them how to code, I think that would really help. Secondly, we should show students how coding will improve reproducibility in their data and speed up their data analysis. And this will enable modeling tasks that they can't do by hand very easily, right? We should also be encouraging more interdisciplinary projects where students are going to be working with life science, computer science, as well as engineering. So we need to realize that the world is not just a very compartmentalized area, but scientists often work in multiple areas. Computational chemistry, I really work in chemistry, biology, physics, and computer science. So I've got experience in all of those areas. We should also offer more low-stakes workshops and boot camps, short modules. There's a lot of these on YouTube. There's a lot of these online. Even Harvard University and other schools are putting things out there. Even using tools like Jupyter Notebooks for collecting data. And this is where a lot of chemistry concepts can be further integrated with their code. So if we can, better integrate that interdisciplinary and show students what coding can actually do for you, then I think that's one of the best ways to move forward. So I hope I've kind of pulled the veil a little bit, if you will, off of programming, and hopefully made it sound a little bit less intimidating for you. Overall, I hope you enjoyed this video, this episode, and so if you like this, go ahead and hit the like, comment, and subscribe button. Put any questions you might have or any comments. Maybe if you have a good course or something, some tool that you want to add and let us all know about. Put that in the comments below. That really helps, and that helps the YouTube algorithm kind of further say, hey, people are watching these videos, and that kind of helps me out as well too. So I appreciate that a lot. And for now, thank you for watching, and I will see you in episode 11. So thank you. You have been listening to Biochemistry Unfolded, from atoms to algorithms. Thank you for watching. We will see you again in the next video.